Shadow Hack. Chapter 811, Convinced. Within an enormous tree outside Pipa clan, Brunhilde looked at Li Yunmu holding the petite Lu Bailing in the plaza of the village. Her expression was indifferent, but she suddenly stretched her hand, putting it at Li Yunmu's back, and ruthless pinching it. Li Yunmu instantly woke up from the meditative state and glared at Brunhilde while suspiciously saying, "Little Bulletin, what the hell are you doing? You still dare to ask me what is going on? On the contrary, it is my turn to ask you that question. Your shadow is tightly holding Pipa clan's holy daughter in his bosom without letting go. Have you become so unbridled that you even dare to do so in front of your wife?" Brunhilde frowned, releasing divine power through the hand pinching Li Yunmu's waist and strengthening her grip. Li Yunmu felt guilty, but he revealed an ignorant expression and anxiously said, Wait, you don't need to take out young anger on my shadow's actions on me. If you want to blame someone, then go find trouble with that shadow." After saying that, Li Yunmu immediately used insect step to run away, leaving behind after images in the sky. Brunhilde coldly snorted and then chased after him. "If you have ability, then don't run." On the plaza, Li Yunmu, who was holding Lu Bailing, was slightly startled, but soon a smile appeared on his face. The holy daughters became suspicious of it, and Yunfen frowned, then coughed and said, "Brazen thief, you still dare to lie." Before her words could fade away, Li Yunmu snapped back to attention and slowly said, "Why would I lie?" Li Yunmu released Lu Bailing from his embrace, then stepped forward and punched the air with both his hands. The holy daughters, despite their vigilance, sustained a heavy attack and fell a few meters back. "This punch is the interest for attacking my subordinate." Li Yunmu withdrew his punch and then turned toward Chen Qiu lying on the lawn outside the room. "All right, you've had enough sleep." As soon as he said that, the motionless Chen Qiu stood up and bowed toward Li Yunmu while saying with a smile, "Master, you finally came out." Chen Qiu's smile was not because he was embarrassed for being seen through by Li Yunmu. If he had crawled back from the ground and faced the attacks of the four holy daughters, he would have been courting death. In such a situation, feigning unconsciousness was also considered as an ability. Li Yunmu nodded and said to the system in his brain, "You should draw out Chen Qiu's memories and project a vision in the sky." The system did not reply, but directly formed a black beetle which flew above Chen Qiu's head. A ray of light shot out from its back, forming a screen in the sky. On it, the scene of Asura city's people massacring mortals appeared, then it changed to the four young masters fighting over Pipa clan's children. The holy daughters, who were blown away by the attack, looked at the screen in stupefaction, even forgetting about the blood flowing down the corners of their mouths. Neither of them had expected that the people of Asura city would go on a rampage in the territory of Lakshmi city. Ever since they had become the holy daughters, the territories of the seven ancient gods had remained peaceful. People from the territory of one ancient god simply did not dare to casually step into the territory of another ancient god, let alone brazenly massacre mortals of other territories in broad daylight. The holy daughters residing in Lakshmi city had not sensed anything, and their expressions changed. If it were not for the crisis of Pipa clan, it was likely that they would have only sensed something was wrong after countless more mortals had been slaughtered. Suddenly, terrifying fear gripped their hearts. Although ancient god Lakshmi did not absorb power of belief, the number of mortals in every territory was fixed. If any of the ancient gods kidnapped mortals of other regions, their strength would be greatly amplified. The subtle balance existing between the seven ancient gods would instantly be broken, and the entire Lanlu would be caught in a fight over power of belief once more. The black beetle flew away from Chen Qiu's head and entered Li Yunmu's head, disappearing there. The sky became peaceful, and the entire Pipa clan sunk into grief, while the holy daughters entered contemplation. In the meantime, Chen Qiu did not dare to even breathe loudly. After all, the scenes just then contained him massacring mortals. If the four holy daughters thought of making a sacrifice for the departed spirits, how would he escape such a calamity? While thinking of that, Chen Qiu retreated a few steps, walking behind Li Yunmu, where he lowered his head without making any sound. Now you should be convinced. At normal times, which ancient god would dare to do such a thing? Only when something has happened to an ancient god, would the other ancient gods be tempted. Without ancient god Lakshmi, even if all of you are gods of the 12 music clans, you will be reduced to the position of slaves. The group of holy daughters did not reply for a time. After a while, Feng Ren raised her head to look at Li Yunmu and slowly said, "If ancient god Lakshmi has perished, then what are you, a god of unknown origins, trying to do? Asura's plans can be understood, but what exactly are your intentions? I can't stand injustice. I helped retain the soul of your ancient god Lakshmi, so you holy daughters should be grateful to me and not attack me," Li Yunmu said while smiling. Yunfen coldly snorted at him. "Your distinguished self is really kind-hearted. Even as a god from outside, you still rushed to Lanlu to assist our ancient goddess. Truthfully speaking, even if only a part of ancient god Lakshmi remains, there's no need for you rescue her. She is an innate ancient goddess while you are at most the same as us, only a god and nothing more." Li Yunmu smiled, then a demonic presence erupted from his body, which became more and more formidable. It almost instantly reached the level of an ancient god before disappearing. The minds of Yunfen and the other holy daughters were assaulted by the formidable presence, and their expressions turned gloomy. "Now you should believe me. Lakshmi whom you serve is an ancient goddess, and I am also an ancient god, so why should I not have the ability to rescue her?" Yunfen looked at the unconscious Lu Bailing, then slowly stood up from the ground and saluted Li Yunmu, showing her respect. She who wouldn't believe anything previously was instantly convinced of Li Yunmu's words after seeing his strength. Even if he had only revealed the presence of an ancient god and had not exposed the characteristic specific to an ancient god, she was still convinced. His strength was simply formidable. He had easily injured 4 holy daughters with a wave of his hand, which was impossible to do unless he was an ancient god. The other 3 holy daughters saw Yunfen's actions and gradually stood up as well. They bowed and properly saluted, showing their respect. Yunfen looked at Li Yunmu, then respectfully said, "I don't know whether Lord Ancient God has already brought Ancient God Lakshmi back to life. If Ancient Goddess has already been rescued, then we request to have audience with her so that she can explain the situation to us and give us commands. This way, we holy daughters will know what to do." Chapter 812, Lakshmi City's Strength. Li Yunmu naturally replied positively regarding Yunfen's question. Ever since he had learned about ancient god Lakshmi's part of soul from Chen Qiu, he had been scheming to find her. Only after he found the ancient goddess, the 2 of them could join hands and deal with Asura and the other 5 ancient gods. But after ancient god Lakshmi awakened from the jade pipa, she acted rudely, and Li Yunmu could only seal her inside Lu Bailing's shadow. The 4 holy daughters followed behind Li Yunmu with Lu Bailing, who had recovered her reason, between them. When the girl snapped back to reality, she looked at the holy daughters by her side and then said in astonishment, "Elder sisters, how come you are suddenly at my side? I didn't notice anything." After speaking, Lu Bailing looked at the shadow under her feet, which was still squirming and making her feel somewhat weird and uncomfortable. After all, it was ancient god Lakshmi whom all the holy daughters served, so every step of hers which landed on the shadow was a big disrespect toward the ancient goddess. Lu Bailing extended her left leg and stepped on the shadow, then tried to move her right leg in another direction, but still ended up stepping on the shadow. After seeing this, Lu Bailing helplessly looked at the struggling shadow with guilt covering her whole face. She quickly recovered her calm expression, however, and stepped on the shadow while inwardly praying to the name of ancient god Lakshmi. "Yath, younger sister Bailing, your shadow is somewhat strange. It surprisingly changed form under the sunlight. How did this happen? Quickly tell elder sister," a holy daughter holding a jade flute in her hand said. "Ah!" Lu Bailing cried out in fear, then quickly recovered her cowl. "Nothing, my shadow just suddenly became like this. I also don't clearly understand what happened, Lu Bailing lied and entered the wooden room while stepping on her shadow with each step. The group of holy daughters sat down next to each other, and Li Yunmu looked at Lu Bailing sitting in the middle. He extended his hand and pulled out a metasphere from the shadow beneath her and held it between his fingers. The same moment, a crisp voice similar to that of a yellow aureole echoed in the room. You finally released me. Youngster, do you know what you're doing? The remaining soul part of this ancient goddess might end up extinguished if you don't. It would be better if you placed me in the Jade Peepayeth. Where did so many people come from? Before her words could fade away, ancient god Lakshmi turned silent. The metasphere also stopped moving, safely settling down between Li Yunmu's fingers. As an ancient goddess who had existed for countless years, Lakshmi had always been a graceful and composed figure in the memories of the holy daughters. However, ancient god Lakshmi had not expected that just as she was pulled out of the shadow, 4 holy daughters would suddenly appear in front of her, so she spoke freely, completely destroying her image. The 4 oldest holy daughters looked at the metasphere held between Li Yunmu's fingers with wide eyes filled with incredulity. Lu Bailing, who had stepped upon ancient god Lakshmi, on the other hand, did not utter a sound. She felt somewhat awkward and lowered her head. Her fair cheeks turned red, and she kept repeating in her heart that it was not her fault. After a period of silence, the 4 heavenly daughters respectfully knelt with their foreheads touching the ground and said, "Greetings, ancient god Lakshmi." The metasphere shuddered a little, then calmly replied, "All holy daughters rise." Yunfen frowned, then looked at the metasphere and suspiciously asked, "Ancient god Lakshmi, is it true that only this part of your soul remains?" The other holy daughters looked at the metasphere one by one, waiting for her reply. Ancient god Lakshmi was silent for a moment before asking, "Asura invaded the territory of my Lakshmi city." "Yes, mortals were massacred by the forces of Asura city. This time, holy daughter Bailing luckily released her projection, which brought us all here. Otherwise, we would have remained in the dark. Ancient god Lakshmi, if only this part of your soul remains, then the situation is extremely dangerous. You should take a look at the holy daughters of the 12 music clans and select the one whose body you want to possess," Yunfen said respectfully with a hint of warmth in her eyes. Apparently, as long as any method could help in the calamity of ancient gods, even if it meant sacrificing oneself, they would not be the least bit dissatisfied. Li Yunmu watched as the other 3 holy daughters as well as Lu Bailing nodded their heads with warmth in their eyes. Seeing this situation, he felt his head ache. The reverence toward the gods in Lanlu region was extremely terrifying. The mortals were actually even ready to sacrifice themselves. As long as they could assist the ancient gods, they were willing to do anything. In the eyes of people on earth, they would be no different from madmen. Ancient god Lakshmi coughed a few times before slowly saying, "Even if I possessed your bodies, I would still remain in God realm, so how could I fight against Asura? Only after regaining the missing part of my soul and body will I become the true ancient god Lakshmi, so you all don't need to trouble yourselves. The lifetime of this remaining part of my soul is very short, so I will enter Lu Bailing's shadow. Now, I want you all to hear and obey Li Yunmu's every order." After saying that, the metasphere struggled free from Li Yunmu's fingers and flew into Lu Bailing's shadow. Li Yunmu hadn't expected that ancient god Lakshmi would surprisingly return to Lu Bailing's shadow of her own initiative. Just a moment ago when she came out, she was so insistent on returning to the Jade Pipa, but in the end, she entered the shadow of her own accord. He could not understand what exactly had happened, but it was pretty good. If the ancient goddess returned to the Jade Pipa, it would be tantamount to her saying that she still wanted to possess Lu Bailing's body. Her obediently returning to the shadow meant that she had already given up the notion of possessing the girl. The 4 holy daughters looked at each other, then Yunfen shifted her gaze to Li Yunmu and respectfully said, "Ancient god Yunmu, what are your instructions? Before that, I want to ask you, what's the strength of the 12 music clans? How many gods do you have?" Li Yunmu slowly said. In Lanlu, it's the lowest. The gods of the 12 music clans are only the holy daughters, excluding sister Lu Bailing. Pipa clan has no qualified successor, which was the reason why younger sister Lu Bailing was chosen as the holy daughter. Under the gods, each clan has 3 elders, the cultivation of whom is at great circle of sage Flux expert realm. In other words, they are half-gods. Below them is a group of younger disciples with their strength ranging between initial stage Flux expert to sage Flux expert level, Yunfen explained earnestly. Li Yunmu nodded, understanding that Yunfen's words did not include Pipa clan. In the Great Battle, Pipa clan was almost wiped out. It lost all of its strength when both its god and half-gods died. Your strength indeed is the lowest, Li Yunmu said with his brow creased. The strength of the other 6 ancient gods was extremely formidable. It was especially so due to the use of power of belief. Almost all of their clan elders as well as direct descendants were gods, while they also had countless great circle sage Flux experts as well as sage Flux experts. Yunfen noticed the disdain in Li Yunmu's tone and quickly reminded him, although we of Lakshmi city don't use the power of belief directly, we can do it through our music instruments. The music instruments of almost everyone here contains power of belief which can increase our strength for a short time. Chapter 813, Setting Out. When Li Yunmu thought of power of belief existing in the music instruments, Lu Bailing's jade pipa came to his mind. It could raise her strength from initial stage sage Flux expert to god level, providing an effect similar to the treasure used by Ming Xiu to increase his cultivation. All methods which could amplify a person's strength were extremely rare. All the methods to temporarily increase strength which Li Yunmu had seen previously also had after effects once used. Oh, tell me, how can using power of belief can increase your strength for a short time? Li Yunmu asked while looking at Yunfen with a gaze full of interest. Upon seeing that Li Yunmu was interested, Yunfen recovered her previous contempt and her face betrayed her pride. Ever since the power of belief appeared, it has always been used in Lanlu. Even after the first battle between gods, it was used in secret in Lanlu. But once true God disappeared, our gods they did it openly. There are 2 methods to use the power of belief. The first is to infuse some weapon with the power of belief. As long as you can circulate the power of belief in the weapon with your energy and use it as your own, it will greatly amplify your strength. Naturally, this boost in strength is short-term. The merit of using this method is, however, that it doesn't leave any residual after effects. Another method is to gather the power of belief directly in your body to increase your strength permanently. This makes it look like a different method, but in truth, you are still borrowing power. Li Yunmu then spoke while still thinking about what he had heard. The power of belief gathered in the music weapon, when used to increase your strength, can be considered as borrowed power. But gathering the power of belief in your own body, how can that be considered as borrowing power? Yunfen smiled, looking dazzling under the sunlight. Her crimson lips moved slightly and she slowly said, although the increase in strength provided by gathering the power of belief in your body is eternal, once it is used, it will create a connection with the mortals. If the mortals remain happy, then everything will be good and there won't be any harm. But if the mortals stop believing in you, the strength raised by the power of belief will decrease greatly and may even harm your original cultivation. Therefore, in Lanlu, mortals are used to throw dirty water on one's enemies. Only when the mortals begin to reject their old god can a new god enter the scene. After saying that, Yunfen saw that Li Yunmu was lost in thought, and she lowered her head to size him up. The gaze of the blushing Lu Bailing was also fixed on him. At this time, Li Yunmu, who was pondering over Yunfen's words, suddenly gained enlightenment. It was clear to him why the true God wanted to destroy this power of belief. The system didn't care about whether the mortals lived peacefully or were ruined and orphaned. Instead, it was concerned about the flaws of the power of belief. Although power of belief was good in concept, it had a fatal weakness which could not be removed. It could act both as a reward and a restraint. Once the power of belief was used, it created an eternal connection with mortals which could not be severed. This connection would then influence the strength of gods for all time. This was one of the reasons. The other one was that power of belief led to battles between gods. This musical instrument containing power of belief could raise Lu Bailing's strength from initial stage sage Flux expert to god. Then you all who are already gods should be able to raise your strength to ancient god realm after using the power of belief. Li Yunmu's attention returned to reality, and he looked at the holy daughters. But when I attacked just a moment ago, I didn't sense the presence of any ancient god. Yunfan's complexion turned red, and she said with some embarrassment, Lakshmi city doesn't borrow power of belief to cultivate, so its control over mortals is also not very strict, and thus the amount of power of belief collected is also the lowest compared to the other 6 cities. Although we can use the musical instruments to increase our strength, younger sister Lu Bailing's cultivation is very low, only at the initial stage of Sage Flux expert realm, so the amount of power of belief required to raise her strength to god level is also very low. If we want to reach the ancient god realm, that can only be done through gathering power of belief in our bodies. Li Yunmu nodded, his conjunction turned out to be right. If the power of belief could really increase the strength of 12 holy daughter to ancient god level so easily, Lakshmi city's strength would not be the lowest. Since everything is explained, I will tell you my plan. Right now, the body and other soul parts of ancient god Lakshmi are in Asura's hands. If we want to obtain them, we will have to kill Asura. But given the present strength of ancient god Lakshmi as well as Lakshmi city, it is almost impossible to do. So we can only borrow strength from others. The other 5 gods don't know that Asura has invaded Lakshmi city. You all also know the regulations of Lanlu, that the 7 ancient gods will manage their own regions and will never interfere or invade another's territory. Since Asura broke this regulation, you all must let the other 5 ancient gods recuperating in the divine palace learn about this matter. Additionally, you must do so while avoiding letting the other 5 ancient gods find out about ancient god Lakshmi's situation, and for that, you must gather all of Lakshmi city's power of belief in one weapon. Yunfan nodded at first, but when she heard the final sentence, she frowned slightly. Lord Ancient God, can you tell us why must all the power of belief be gathered in one weapon? If we do this, then the strength of our 12 holy daughters will decrease. Our final aim is to use the alliance of the 5 ancient gods to deal with Asura. If we don't have a certain amount of strength, the 5 ancient gods will first deal with Lakshmi city. Naturally, this weapon in which the power of belief is gathered won't be used by you, but only Lu Bailing. After Li Yunmu finished speaking, he looked at the group of holy daughters. When Lu Bailing heard his words, her eyes went wide, and an indescribable expression appeared on her face. Yunfan's brows also creased slightly, but they smoothed out the next instant, and she said with a smile, Lord is intelligent. So we will now take younger sister Lu Bailing and Pipa clansmen to Lakshmi city to prepare for everything. As for the matter of spreading and forming an alliance to deal with Asura, I will leave it up to you as well. I will follow Chenqiu and return to Asura city, then see if I can find an opportunity to kill Asura and rescue the children of Pipa clan. While speaking, Li Yunmu looked at Lu Bailing. She also looked at him, her face turning redder by the moment and her heart growing restless. After his speech, she picked up the jade pipa lying on the table and followed the holy daughters out. Before long, loud clamor came from outside. The noise was soon followed by the sound of something breaking, and then the village turned silent. Chenqiu looked at the heavenly daughters leaving with the Pipa clansmen, then turned around and entered the wooden room. Master, the Pipa clansmen have left with the holy daughters. What should we do now? Li Yunmu looked at Chenqiu, then his body changed into black mist. It flew outside at a fast speed and entered the shadows on the ground, disappearing completely. Naturally, we must go to Asura city. Chapter 814, Asura. When Chenqiu heard the words Asura city, his body shuddered all of a sudden. He hastily knelt on the ground in front of Li Yunmu and anxiously said, Master, Do you intend to abandon me? Did this little me do something wrong? When Li Yunmu, who was in pain because Brunhilde had grabbed his waist, saw Chen Qiu's actions, he was somewhat stupefied and stayed silent for a long time. After a while though, he waved his hand. You did nothing wrong. I simply agreed to ally with ancient god Lakshmi and help her deal with Asura so we can retrieve her divine body and soul. So in the trip to Asura city, we will follow behind you as your subordinates. When Chen Qiu heard the first half of the sentence, he sighed, but when he heard the second half, his heartbeat suddenly quickened. The ancient gods were going to act as his subordinates, so if he made the slightest mistake, his entire existence might be erased. After all, they were both ancient gods, and there was no way for him to refuse the matter. This little me understands, Chen Qiu said and went to stand respectfully behind the two people. Before him, Brunhilde pinched Li Yunmu's waist ever harder and said with a frown, helping an ancient goddess retrieve her body and soul, why don't you speak truthfully instead? Isn't it all for that holy daughter of Pipa clan? Li Yunmu frowned, then hastily said, little bulletin, quickly let go of me. I'm helping the ancient goddess not only for Lu Bailing but to obtain the heavenly grand ritual. If we help Lakshmi, we will naturally also get our hands on heavenly grand ritual without needing to use force. Isn't that better? Really? Brunhilde looked at Li Yunmu and saw that he didn't seem to be lying. She then pulled away her lily white hand and placed it on his arm before softly saying, then we don't need to pretend to be Chen Qiu's subordinates and can easily find a corner to stay in Asura city. Chen Qiu looked at Brunhilde's figure with excitement welling up in his heart. He really hoped that Li Yunmu would agree. If the two ancient gods acted as his subordinates, then even if they were pretending, it would still place enormous pressure on Chen Qiu. Li Yunmu pulled Brunhilde close and explained his thoughts. That won't do. If we casually found a place to stay, we could not go to many places without alarming Asura. Although Chen Qiu is a descendant of a branch family, for better or worse, he is still considered as nobility. His authority in Asura city is much higher than that of mortals. Upon hearing his words, Brunhilde nodded and indifferently said, since this is the case, we will act as Chen Qiu's subordinates. Speaking of which, I still haven't seen any great clans until now. I must take a trip around Asura city. Brunhilde was the princess of the land of ice and an ancient god-level powerhouse, so everyone she came in contact with was a high-level expert. How could she know about something as low as clans? Well then, we will start on our trip to Asura city. After finishing their conversation, they sat down on the fierce tiger and began to advance towards Asura city with a frowning Chen Qiu following behind them. While traveling through the jungle, the three of them heard the sounds of Asura city's people engaging in wanton massacre of Lakshmi city's villages as well as the miserable wails of mortals. A pensive melody followed that, and then everything returned to quiet all of a sudden. Yunfan and the other holy daughters had taken action very quickly. After returning to Lakshmi city, they made proper arrangements in regards to all matters. First, they gathered the descendants of the 12 music clans and dispatched them to deal with the people of Asura city attacking their mortals. After that, they gathered the power of belief in all the weapons in one place, quickly concentrating it in the jade pipa. After 3 days, a 5-colored light blossomed out of Lakshmi city, pervading through the sky for a long time without dispersing. A formidable ancient god presence also appeared in a brazen manner, attracting the attention of the divine palace and startling the 5 injured ancient gods. In the Asura city, ancient god Asura also sensed that extremely familiar presence. Asura city was like an enormous skeleton lying on the ground with its edges composed of an enormous circular wall. In the city, the lowest level mixed races and mortals lived near the edges and at the bottom. Above them, there was a region where the powerful and rich people lived, while the majority of upper skeleton was the territory of the 4 great clans. As for the skull part, it was the mansion of the city lord. In a room formed of the head and eyes, what seemed to be a 20-year-old youngster with black hair was reclining on a leather chair while holding a crystal goblet in his hand and slowly swaying it. Before him, a 2-headed, three-armed middle-aged man wearing fancy clothes was kneeling. Godfather, Rahu clan's young master has returned with the group of children releasing multicolored light. They all belong to the Pipa clan. Right now, Luo Tian is waiting at the entrance. Do you want to see him? The middle-aged man asked respectfully. The black-haired youth sighed, then put down his goblet and went to a glass window nearby to look at the sky and said in a profound voice, "No need, let him return. As for those Pipa clan's children, imprison them in the city lord's mansion for now. We'll deal with them later." Yes. After saying that, the middle-aged man's expression tightened, and he immediately retreated. The luxurious room sunk into silence once more. The black-haired youth gazed at the ancient god presence in the distance, then changed into his original appearance, which had 3 heads and 6 arms. A ruthless smile appeared on his 3 faces and he muttered to himself. "Lakshmi, only a part of your soul remains, but you are still so restless. Truly disobedient." Asura calmed down then and reclined on the leather chair once more while slowly swaying the crystal goblet in his hand. He pondered over Lakshmi's intent behind releasing her presence. It was a fact that the majority of her soul had already been devoured. Only a small part had fled into the lower realms to possess a mortal. Mortals did not have cultivation, so she could not use the power of belief to strengthen herself. And if she wanted to possess a flux expert under God realm, it would require a lot of time. Then how could she possess a body and recover her original cultivation in such a short time? Could it be that Lakshmi had also begun to congeal power of belief to cultivate like their elder brothers? The smile on Asura's face became even wider, which could terrify anyone under the illumination of a faint light. In any case, you shouldn't even think about obstructing me in becoming a master god. Asura mumbled to himself, then lifted one of his free hands, and a dark flame appeared on his palm. The presence he emitted rose above the level of ancient gods and to just below master gods. At that moment, the 5 startled ancient gods descended from the divine palace into Lakshmi city to search for the ancient goddess. In the meantime, the 2-headed 3-armed middle-aged man's expression in Asura city was ice-cold. He slowly walked to the mouth part of the skeleton in a magnificent hall where Luo Tian was sitting. Chapter 815, Idiot. Ashbai was sitting on the leather chair with his slightly swollen body protruding outwards and frosty expression on his face. Underneath him, Luo Tian was sitting with his tall and sturdy body. He excitedly said, "Lord City Master, what does Godfather say? Did he agree to see me?" Luo Tian was extremely excited in his heart. First, he managed to capture the children releasing 5-colored light, then on the way, he encountered the ambush of Jasmine and Domingle but still managed to safely return to Asura city. After returning, he rushed to the city lord's mansion to request his rewards. Previously Asura had stayed in the Asura city instead of returning to Divine Palace to issue this mission, so clearly it was extremely important. Now he had already returned with the children emitting 5-colored light, so the credit was naturally his. As for the rewards, he didn't need to opportunity to become a god, as he already was a direct family descendant with extremely pure bloodline. So if he cultivated laboriously, he could gather the power of belief in his body and become a god. What he wanted, was to enter the eyes of ancient god Asura. After ancient god Asura devoured ancient goddess Lakshmi, he had destroyed the rules of Lanlu which had continued for thousands of years. So naturally it would lead to the second war between gods over the power of belief. At this time, if he had already obtained ancient god Asura's favor, then he would be able to soar quickly to heavens. After ancient god Asura devours the other 6 ancient gods, he would become the true master of one region, rising to master god. Ashbai coldly snorted, looking at the excited expression of Luo Tian and said in a poor tone, "You see me sitting here, do you think that my appearance resembles the situation when Godfather granted you audience? Really stupid." Hearing this, Luo Tian was startled for a long while. After a while, he suspiciously said, "Then what does City Master mean? Godfather had commanded to search for children emitting 5-colored light in Lakshmi city's territory. I found them and returned as soon as possible. Then why isn't Godfather granting an audience to me? Ashbai looked at Luo Tian, contempt filled his face. After a long while he again opened his mouth. You want an explanation? All right, you bring the children emitting 5-colored light. Luo Tian looked at Ashbai, then waved his hand indicating his subordinate to bring the children. Soon, 2 bodyguards entered with a group of children walking unsteadily. The oldest among this group was only 8 to 9 years old, while the youngest was 3 to 4 and had just recently learned to walk. When they looked at the Asura people with malevolent expression and oddly shaped bodies, a hint of confusion appeared in their big shining eyes and they began to wail. You yourself take a proper look at this group of Pipa clan children. Ashbai angrily said. Asura looked at them but he didn't find anything different. Then he took out the dry heaven mirror from his black armor and shined it on the group of children, but nothing happened. Even the 5-colored had also dispersed. What happened? Ashbai saw that Luo Tian had understood and waved towards the 2 bodyguards, saying, Put this group of Pipa clan's children into my prison and deal with them later. The bodyguards retreated, leading the bawling children away, leaving behind only a cold-faced Ashbai and a dumbstruck Luo Tian in the room. How did this happen? This group of children was definitely releasing 5-colored light at the Pipa clan, then how did they become like this in the city lord's mansion? Luo Tian said in an incredulous tone. Ashbai, sitting on the main seat, again revealed an expression of contempt. He knew that Rahu clan's people were single-minded, it wasn't easy to make them understand anything. But he hadn't expected that the present young master of Rahu clan would be foolish to this extent. The problem was in front of them, but Luo Tian was still asking what happened here, simply a complete blockhead. Each generation of the 4 great clans was inferior to the last one. How do you think this happened? Ashbai said resentfully. Can't you see that you were swindled? As a young master of the 4 great clans, you can't even see this point. At that time, Godfather had commanded us to capture the soul of ancient goddess Lakshmi and not to kidnap the children, releasing multicolored light. Illuminating under the dry heaven mirror is the only way to reveal that somebody has been possessed. Hearing this, Luo Tian didn't reply but his complexion turned ashen. The glass of wine in his large hand instantly turned into dust. Next instant, he furiously stood up, the power exploding from his body turned the exquisite chair into powder. Where do you think this is? Ashbai looked at Luo Tian being impudent in city lord's mansion, the fury in his heart exploded forth with the might of God suppressing Luo Tian. Instantly, Luo Tian woke up and looked at Ashbai with ashen complexion, his tall and sturdy body trembled. He directly knelt on the ground, kowtowing to admit his mistake and said, I was wrong, Lord City Master. Go away and control your anger. Saying this, Ashbai got up and left the visitors' hall. Luo Tian inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. If City Lord had really decided to punish him, then even if he was the young master of Rahu clan, he would still suffer a calamity. All the members of 4 clans were Asura's children. Luo Tian also called Asura as godfather, like Ashbai. Although there didn't seem to be any difference between the two, but in fact the difference was large. After all, Ashbai was Asura's first son, was directly connected to him by blood. The only people in the 4 great clans who could stand on the same level as City Lord, were the 4 founders of every clan. If Ashbai angrily punished him, Rahu clan's founder still wouldn't come to save him. Luo Tian calmed his heart and walked out of the City Lord's mansion. The few subordinates outside, surrounded him and anxiously said, What happened, young master? Ancient god Asura didn't praise you. Hearing their words, Luo Tian almost lost control of his heart, which he had calmed down, and directly extended his large hand, slapping the subordinate who inquired to ground. Get lost. After saying this, Luo Tian sat on his elephant and prepared to return to clan to inquire with his father, who was also Patriarch, about what should be done next. Originally, their Rahu clan's strength was in the first place among the 4 clans, but their brains couldn't compare to the other 3 clans who were always duping them with some plots and conspiracies. This maintained the balance between the four great clans. After ancient god Asura issued this mission, Rahu clan had specifically allowed young master Luotian to take the treasure of the clan to plunder so as to allow Luotian to enter Asura's eyes. As long as this matter was done properly, Rahu clan would automatically become the number one among the four clans, and would enjoy even more power of belief. But presently their plan had fallen apart, Rahu clan's advantage was also lost. With balance returning to the four clans, now they could only plan for the future. Just as Luotian closed his eyes to rest, his felt that his elephant has stopped. He opened his eyes to see what had happened, and saw a group of people in the front, all of them were from two-faced Moro clan. He slowly creased his brows and inquired. What are you Moro clan people thinking? You dare to come in the path of this young master, don't you want to live? Quickly get lost. Rahu clan young master, our patriarch has a request. Chapter 816, Great Trouble. Luotian riding his elephant, entered the residence of lofty Moro clan. He was already accustomed to this sort of extravagance, he saw it every day at Rahu clan. While proceeding towards the visitors' hall, he was somewhat suspicious as to why Moro clan's patriarch had asked to see him, even inviting Jasmine and to mingle. Could it be because of Mingxiu? Thinking of this, Luotian seemed to have felt it was somewhat strange. When he was at Pipa clan, after he won the group of children releasing 5-colored light and was returning, Jasmine and Domingle had intercepted him before long to forcibly take the group of children. Only this Mingxiu never appeared during the whole time. This caused him to become suspicious as to whether Mingxiu had already changed his character, stopped imitating dogs and stealing chickens. The more he thought, the more he felt some happened with Mingxiu. Only if some accident has happened to the young master of Moro clan Mingxiu, would the patriarch of Moro clan have the courage to take out the patriarch token to order the 3 young masters to come to their residence. Although there were 4 great clans in Asura city and each of them managed their respective territories, but when patriarch token is taken out, then regardless of which clan's members they are, everyone would have to follow it. Under ordinary circumstances when nothing happened, no one would take out the patriarch token. While thinking over these matters, Luotian entered the visitors' hall. Only a few people were seated in the large visitors' hall. On the main seat, a man with relatively handsome appearance and 3 heads was sitting, he was the patriarch of Moro clan, Jiaoshu. 2 people were sitting straight and tall below his seat, Jasmine and Domingle. When Luotian looked at the 2 of them, a hint of anxiousness appeared on their face. Patriarch Jiaoshu, why exactly did you ask me to rush over here? Luotian immediately began to talk. But Jiaoshu, who was sitting on the main seat, remained expressionless with his both eyes like a black hole which could devour anyone's soul. After a long time, Jiaoshu opened his mouth. I called you over to ask you something. When you were returning with those children, did you encounter my son Mingxiu on the path? Sure enough, it was this matter. Luotian directly stated the facts. After coming out of Pipa clan, I directly rushed to the Asura city without stopping for rest. Patriarch Jiaoshu should know about the competition between 4 young masters, thus entering Asura city has been considered as the ending of the mission as always. I only encountered Jasmine and Domingle on the path, as for Mingxiu, I never saw him. Yes, Patriarch Jiaoshu, when I and Domingle left out the Pipa clan, Mingxiu was already there. Following which, we both planned and ambushed Luotian to snatch those children but lost in the end. After that, we all returned to Asura city on our own and never happened to see Mingxiu on the path. I can also guarantee that I never saw Mingxiu. Jasmine and Domingle, who were sitting on their seats, also hastily supplemented. Jiaoshu, sitting on the main seat, looked at the 3 young master below and suddenly his complexion turned pale. He slowly said, Mingxiu is dead, the jade tile filled with his presence which he left behind, has already shattered. His words were like a stone thrown on the surface of a calm lake, creating great waves. Regardless of whether it was Jasmine or Domingle or the stubborn-minded Luotian, a hint of anxiousness appeared on their faces. Ming Xiu had unexpectedly died in the territory of Lakshmi city, and now the intention of Jiao Xiu for calling them was that he suspected them to be the killers. Domingle and Jasmine's complexion became increasingly more solemn. According to reason, now that they had already been interrogated, so naturally they must be released. The statement of three of them were identical, which was a sufficient proof that the three of them weren't lying. But presently Jiao Xiu hadn't released them, and also gave the news of Ming Xiu's death, clearly implying that there was another possibility involving the three of them. He suspected that the three of them had allied to deal with Ming Xiu and thus maintained identical confessions. The three young masters felt that the visitors' hall had become somewhat chilly. If they couldn't get out in time, then they really might not be able to get out. Ever since the four great clans were born, the competition between young masters of each clan was an ordinary matter. But every young master acted within the norms. Even when competing with each other, they wouldn't try to axe the other young masters. Ordinarily, they would stop after a little competition battle. But presently, Ming Xiu was dead, which was a major event. This matter was a great trouble. Patriarch Jiao Xiu fears that we three young masters have killed Ming Xiu. Although we four compete with each other, but we naturally understand our limits. How could we kill him? Domingle restrained the panic in his heart and said with fake calmness. His words are the truth. As the young masters of our clan, we definitely have complied with the rules. Moreover, we aren't foolish enough to kill one of the other young masters at this time. That's right. The three young masters continued explaining, but Jiao Xiu still didn't let them leave. In fact, there wasn't even the slightest change in his complexion. Jiao Xiu said with his face frosty and calm voice. If it had been ordinary times, I naturally would have believed that you three would comply with the established rules and wouldn't attack another young master. But the situation is special right now. Godfather has returned to Asura city, moreover he has also prepared to annex Lakshmi city and begin the battle of gods. Whichever clan among the four makes the most contributions will become the leader. And our older generations have already become used to the present system, and wouldn't try to change it casually. The only exception are you youngsters. As the young masters of four great clans, if you made enough contributions, then naturally you will be regarded as important by Godfather. Therefore, you three conspiring to murder Ming Xiu isn't completely impossible. After all, one obstruction less would mean extra opportunities for you. Right. These words were like an enormous stone being dropped on the head of the three young masters, causing their complexion to change. It was just as Jiao Xiu said. Presently the circumstances were special, so it was possible that anyone among them could break the rules. And the underlying meaning in his words was clear. He considered the three of them as his murderer. Suddenly Jasmine's eyes shined. She suddenly thought of another person and informed Jiao Xiu. Patriarch Jiao Xiu, I think you are wrong. If we three young masters had killed Ming Xiu, why would we come here after seeing Patriarch token? Wouldn't it be the same as courting death? You yourself said that rules can be broken. We could have returned to our respective clans' territory after seeing your Patriarch token. Although your distinguished self is a mighty god, but you also wouldn't dare to casually enter our clan's residence, right? What's more, the people fighting for the group of children of Pipa clan didn't include only us four young masters. A descendant of branch family of your clan was also present. You should ask him to come over for interrogation. Hearing these words, Domingle suddenly recalled Chen Xiu and said to Jiao Xiu. Yes, that branch family descendant is called Chen Xiu. Seemingly the relation between him and Ming Xiu wasn't good. By the time I reached the territory of Pipa clan, the subordinates of the two of them had already clashed with each other and Ming Xiu's subordinate was killed. When Jiao Xiu heard these words, vigor filled his eyes and he mumbled. Chen Xiu. Chapter 817, Asura City. Three silhouettes could be seen on a small path at the outskirts of Asura City, leisurely walking on the twisted path. Chen Xiu, sitting on his monster lizard, looked at the Asura City. He turned around and respectfully said to the two people behind him. Master, Mistress, we have arrived at Asura City. Although he had spoken, but the two people didn't seem to have heard him and remained immersed in their own world. Li Yunmu was holding Brunhilde in his embrace while looking at the surrounding scenery and chatting with her. While Brunhilde in his embrace was like a newlywed wife of an ordinary person, her fair face had turned completely red. Chen Qiu again looked forward and kept advancing towards the Asura city. After slowly traveling 100 meters, the three of them arrived at the Asura city. Li Yunmu and Brunhilde raised their heads and looked at the lofty city walls with a smile on their face. Only when the two of them got close to the city, were they able to faintly discern an ancient god presence. Asura was indeed present in the city. So Yunmu, are we going to enter the Asura city in our true appearances? Brunhilde inquired with his man. Li Yunmu shook his head with a laugh and replied. If we entered the city with our original appearances, we will probably attract everyone's attention. If Asura saw the two of us, he would probably flee. The 5 regions of origin world were administered by the ancient gods of the respective region. Regardless of whether it were the mortals at the lowest level or flux experts or even gods, they would casually intrude in other regions. Li Yunmu looked like someone from Eastern Domain with black eyes and black hair. While Brunhilde was fair-haired and blue-eyed, being someone from North. The people of Asura city had grotesquely shaped appearances. Apart from the people of Deva clan who looked like ordinary people, everyone else had a part or more growing out of different places. If the two of them entered just like that, they would indeed attract attention. Li Yunmu extended his hand and released demonic energy which covered the two of them. The demonic energy which was like mist, scattered after a long time. While the two people sitting on the fierce tiger had also transformed into standard Asura people. A third eye had appeared between Li Yunmu's 2 eyebrows, making him appeared majestic. And Brunhilde's transformation was even greater. She was originally the princess of Land of Ice, a battle valkyrie who had inherited the genes of Odin and possessed an extremely beautiful appearance. Regardless of wherever she went, she attracted others' attention. Presently, her delicate facial features had been curtailed. 2 giant arms have sprouted above her head from both sides and were loosely hanging. This appearance is quite odd and novel, although it doesn't look good, but it has another charm. A mirror appeared out of nowhere in Brunhilde's hand, in which she checked her appearance while the large hands hanging above head were wantonly waving in the air. The eyes of the face at the back of Chen Qiu's head went wide. He was shocked looking at the changed appearance of the two of them. This changed appearance was indeed very unusual. It didn't resemble the special characteristics of the 4 great clans and also wasn't ugly like the lowest rung people. On careful observation, it appeared like a mix between Doro clan and Rahu clan. The 3 of them leisurely entered the city. Once they entered, the few people at the door saw Chen Qiu and recognized him as a child of Moro clan, bowing respectfully. Following which, when the soldier looked at Li Yunmu and Brunhilde behind Chen Qiu, his complexion tightened, feeling confused about whether he should bow or not. After the 3 of them passed him, the soldier returned to reality and mumbled. Strange, why does the appearance of those 2 look like Rahu clan and Doro clan people, but completely different at the same time? The hierarchy of Asura city was very strict with the 4 clans reigning supreme. If those 2 were from the 4 great clans, then not bowing just now would be a major crime for which he would be thrown in prison. The soldier pondered for a while, then respectfully bowed behind the 3 of them and instantly stood up straight, guarding the door again. After entering the city, the 3 of them saw a desolate district, without any proper houses. It only had a few rooms built with mud and bricks. Few women and children wearing shabby clothes were standing at the gate of the rooms, holding something knitted from hay in their hands. On the path, many children with all sorts of deformities were running around. When Chen Qiu passed through them riding his monster lizard, the children stopped playing and looked at him with shiny eyes filled with some confusion. Next instant, several children were pulled by the women standing outside their doors and immediately forced to kneel on the ground. Li Yunmu saw that one of children forced to kneel on the ground by the women, was secretly lifting his head to look and said with some interest. Chen Qiu, why does this area after entering the city looks like a slum? This is indeed a slum. The people living here include civilians who don't have Asura bloodline or children of 4 clans with extremely impure bloodlines. You see that white wall which is acting as a boundary, actually that is a bone. Asura city is established on an enormous skeleton, the lower half of the body is the impoverished area. Moving in the front, Chen Qiu gave an explanation about the structure of Asura city. The rib region marks the residence of middle-class citizens. Usually the descendants of 4 great clans who don't have formidable strength, reside there. The thoracic cavity is the domain of the 4 great clans. While the skull is where the city lord and ancient god Asura live. The social structure of Asura city is very strict. Poor people have to respectfully kneel towards the people of upper regions, and the branch family descendants living in mid-region also have to bow towards the direct descendants. Usually, it is known that the 4 clans reign supreme in the Asura city. But the genuine master of Asura city is City Lord Ashbai. Even the patriarchs of the 4 great clans have to respectfully salute him. Ashbai is Asura's son, and according to what I heard, his strength is only below ancient gods. Hearing his words, Li Yunmu nodded and noticed that the children at the side of the path, indeed had some features of the 4 great clans. Some had 2 small bulges protruding out of their shoulders, while some had countless marks on their hands, all of which are eyes which cannot open. While some had a distorted small face at the back of their heads. After entering the city, he clearly felt that the status of a person in Asura city was fixed, regardless of whether it was a soldier or these children of slums. On Earth, a soldier is an extremely respectable profession, who didn't need to bend in front of powerful people. While children were the center of their families, even if some children had some deformities, but they were still treated with love. But the Asura city was different. Even a soldier had to bow in front of this branch family descendants and salute properly only because they belonged to the 4 great clans. The 4 great clans didn't care about birth, rather about bloodline. Those with pure bloodline became direct descendants, while those with muddled bloodline became branch family descendants. And those who were unable to grow the different body parts based on their bloodline were thrown into slums and weren't recognized by the 4 great clans. This was the true regulation of Asura city, where bloodline reigned supreme and strength conquered all. Chen Qiu, no wonder you staked your life to fight over the soul of ancient goddess Lakshmi at that time. In order to become a god, to rise above a branch family descendant of Moro clan. Li Yunmu looked at Chen Qiu's back and calmly said. After seeing everything in Asura city, he understood why was Chen Qiu so brutal towards mortals of Lakshmi city at that time. Everything was to obtain merits and finish the assignment. Chapter 818, Patriarch is looking for you. Asura city followed the principles of natural selection and survival of the fittest. Those with pure bloodline could become direct descendants and live with majesty in the upper region of Asura city and even become gods in time. They were unlike branch descendants, who had a ceiling of half-god on their cultivation. If the branch descendants wanted to climb up and become direct disciples, they could only grab every opportunity to advance. Just like a bit earlier when Asura city had issued 2 missions. One was to pretend to be Lakshmi city's soldiers and massacre mortals so that the survivors would develop disgust toward their old god and become more receptive toward a new one. The second was to search and capture the remaining part of ancient god Lakshmi's soul, which would present them with the opportunity to become a god. Chen Qiu had accepted the 2 missions to obtain the chance to become a god. As long as he could do it, he would be able to live with dignity in Asura city. Yes, everything I did previously was to obtain this chance. As long as I become a god, I will become a direct descendant of Moro clan and will have the qualifications to fight for the position of Patriarch. Back then, I was also ready to accept the worst outcome, death. After all my subordinates were hired from the guilds, so their strength naturally couldn't compare to the branch descendants of the 4 great clans. After speaking up to there, Chen Qiu went silent for a moment and looked at the barely discernible white wall in the distance. His gaze seemed to penetrate through the bone and see across the middle city region. After a moment, he continued to speak. Moreover, the 4 young masters had the treasures of their clans which could raise their strength to god realm. Even if I struggled, I would have faced a dead end, having no way to move forward. Yet I still wanted to struggle, to rise above others despite lack of success meaning death. Chen Qiu went silent after saying that, and Brunhilde and Li Yunmu also did not say anything either. Compared to Chen Qiu, who was a branch descendant in Asura city's harsh environment, their circumstances were different. One was born as a god and gradually rose to become an ancient god, while the other one was born in a lower plane but had relied on the system to become a god and the master of 2 regions. As long as the master gods did not return, Li Yunmu was the most formidable expert in the origin world. Chen Qiu did not continue speaking, and they passed through the White Wall, which acted as the boundary between Lower City and Middle City, in silence. They went through a large gate where the soldiers they encountered only glanced at them with their waists completely straight and without any intention to bow. The Middle City was much smaller compared to the Lower City, but it had magnificent buildings. Every family had a large residence with guards at the door. Before long, the trio arrived at another opening in the White Wall. After passing through it, they entered the upper city where the genuinely influential people of Asura city resided. Compared to the mud houses of Lower City and all sorts of buildings in Middle City, the Upper City only had 4 large residences. The area occupied by each one of them was astonishing, since they were an official headquarters of the 4 great clans. If one looked into the distance from the gate of the Upper City, they could see a giant skull, the city lord's mansion. A group of soldiers in black armor were standing behind the gate. When Chen Qiu rose his monster lizard over, a feminine man holding a bone spear walked out from the group of soldiers and said in a cold voice, "You finally came. Patriarch wants to see you." Chen Qiu looked at the feminine man in front of him. He was an efficient subordinate of Patriarch Jiaoxiu, Ming Wang, a half-god level powerhouse and a branch family descendant who resided in Moro clan's residence and only followed Jiaoxiu's commands. When a half-god powerhouse was waiting for a long time at the entrance to summon him, Chen Qiu, as a branch family descendant who had lived in Moro clan for 20-something years, naturally knew what that meant. The moment Li Yunmu had killed Ming Xiu at the Pipa clan, he knew it was going to happen. Each of the direct disciples of the 4 great clans had left behind a jade slip with a part of their soul in the clan's mansion. If they encountered an accident and died, the clan would immediately know. Although Chen Qiu had not contested for the group of children releasing the 5-colored light at the Pipa clan, when all was said and done, he was still present there. The young masters of the other 3 clans had seen him, so when Ming Xiu had died, he was the main suspect. If he really returned with Ming Wang, then regardless of whether it was related to him or not, he would still be buried with Ming Xiu. After recalling what Li Yunmu had told him on the trip to Asura city, Chen Qiu took a deep breath and calmly said while looking at Ming Wang with a determined gaze, "Even if Patriarch has some matter to discuss with me, it must wait until I return from the city lord's mansion. You should know what's urgent and what's not." A hint of ridicule appeared on Ming Wang's face hidden under the black helmet. "You can go to the city lord's mansion later," he said with a cold tone. When the young master of Rahu clan visited, he left city lord Ashbai in a poor mood. He might still be angry, so it would be better if you take it slowly, and Patriarch has something urgent to ask you. After saying that, Ming Wang's black and white eyes focused on Chen Qiu. Although his tone was polite, the underlying meaning was that regardless of however important his affairs were, he had to first meet with Patriarch. After a moment of silence, Chen Qiu looked at Ming Wang coldly and said, "The information I want to report is extremely important, so I naturally have to meet with the city lord first, otherwise, the consequences of this matter won't be something a half-god like you can bear." Although Chen Qiu's tone was extremely serious, Ming Wang only smiled in response. A great flux expert at 9th level surprisingly dared to use such a tone and look down on a half-god powerhouse. He was simply undisciplined and reckless, not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Without saying anything, Ming Wang waved his hand, hinting for a black-armored soldier standing behind him to capture Chen Qiu. If he, a half-god powerhouse, personally moved, it would be the case of strong bullying the weak and he would lose face. The black-armored soldiers he brought with him were direct subordinates of Patriarch, and even the weakest among them had the strength of initial stage Sage Flux experts. It was more than sufficient to capture a great Flux expert branch disciple. The reason why Ming Wang had come was to make sure that Chen Qiu did not escape. If Chen Qiu had really killed Ming Xiu, he would have the clan's treasure Asura eyes in his possession and could use it to arouse his bloodline, which would raise his strength to the level of a god. But even if he borrowed strength, a few Sage Flux experts would be sufficient to deal with him. Chen Qiu's expression tightened, and he directly took out Asura eyes hidden in his clothes. After fusing them with his eyes began to shine like those of a god. After that, the presence he emitted suddenly swelled. From 9th layer of Great Flux Expert to initial stage Sage Flux Expert, and then to Great Circle Sage Flux Expert, until it matched that of Ming Wang. Chen Qiu's presence stabilized at God Realm after rising dramatically. If you obstruct me, I won't be polite anymore. Chen Qiu's figure flickered, and he became a blur that charged straight at Ming Wang. Li Yunmu and Brunhilde, who had been watching passively before, also took action. They limited their strength to 9th layer of Sage Flux Expert Realm and rushed toward the group of black-armored soldiers. When facing them, they cautiously used their martial skills, without leaking the least bit of divine power. A few after-images appeared near the black-armored soldiers, and the next instant, all of them were blown away. They landed on the ground with a loud thump. Chapter 819, Initial Stage Sage Flux Expert. The residence of the Deva clan was near the entrance. Within it, there was a tall minaret in which 3 figures could be seen. They were looking at the entrance and swaying the crystal wine glasses in their hands from time to time. Domingle, whose face was still pale, sensed that a god's presence had appeared near the entrance, and a hint of astonishment appeared on his face. He said with a smile. I hadn't expected that it was really that branch family descendant, he said with a smile. His courage is really great. He surprisingly even dares to use Asura eyes. If he hadn't taken out this treasure, then perhaps he might have been cleansed of all suspicions. While sitting on a mahogany chair, Luo Tian looked at the crystal wineglass in his giant hand and carefully adjusted it before saying, "It is still a pity." Jasmine was clad in red muslin and still wearing a veil on her face. She put down the wineglass and said with a smile, "This Chen Qiu is quite intelligent. Even if he wasn't related to Ming Xiu's death, as long as he had followed Ming Wang, the only ending awaiting him would be death. Patriarch Jiaoxiu would have killed him to bury him with his treasured son. So he had to use Asura eyes to raise his strength to God realm to survive. It was the only gamble he could take." The one-track-minded Luo Tian nodded, then his eyes shone as if he had thought of something, and he asked with some doubt, since he knew this was going to happen, why did he return? Wouldn't it be better for him to flee to other regions? Returning here is the same as courting death. When Jasmine heard that, she rolled her eyes but did not reply, focusing on savoring the exquisite wine in the crystal wine glass. Domingo leaned across the railing and said, if he hadn't returned, then only death would await him too. Godfather is prepared to attack the other 6 ancient gods, so Lanlu will be unified sooner or later. At that time, the entire Lanlu will belong to the Asura clans. Then where could Chen Qiu escape? Moreover, he is only a great flux expert, so he couldn't escape very far. Since he knew that he would be hunted down, why did he kill Ming Xiu? And after killing the young master, he dared to return so brazenly. Admirable, Jasmine mumbled. She recalled the shadow that was in her heart after being summoned by Jiaoxiu. He had used the Patriarch token to call the 3 young masters to understand the situation. At that time, saying one wrong sentence would have been equivalent to death. Jasmine could sense the concealed killing intent from Jiaoxiu. But fortunately, they were able to escape from that visitor's hall using Chen Qiu's name. What exactly is this Chen Qiu planning to do? Jasmine snapped to reality and looked before them. A black shadow was quickly running away from the entrance and toward the city lord's mansion at the peak of the upper city. Behind it, there was another black shadow chasing after it. Chen Qiu wants to go to the city lord's mansion? Is he thinking of seeking protection from the city lord, or does he want to exchange some information for a chance at survival? This is a good show. Let's go to the city lord's mansion to take a look. A hint of madness flashed in the eyes of the three young masters, and they placed their crystal wine glasses before walking out of the minaret. A few minutes earlier at the gates, Ming Wang took note of how Chen Qiu's subordinates defeated the elites of Moro clan in a few breaths and was slightly astonished. A cold smile appeared at the corners of his mouth then, and he said with a smile, "No wonder he could kill young master. It was because he had hired these experts through the guild." Ming Xiu had been given the clan's treasure Asura before he left, and he had brought with him 9 subordinates who were powerful branch family descendants. If Chen Qiu had hired some inferior subordinates from the guild, he would have had no opportunity to kill Ming Xiu. So the only possibility was that Chen Qiu had found some top-class experts through the guild. But in any case, once Ming Xiu was dead, Patriarch Jiao Xiu would know. He had even summoned the 3 young masters to Moro clan. If they had been the ones to kill Ming Xiu, they wouldn't have left the visitors' hall alive. How could a god's fury be pacified so easily? Chen Qiu taking out Asura eyes proved that he was the culprit behind young master's murder. So regardless of however he struggled, he would not be able to escape death. A terrifying pressure burst out from Ming Wang's body, and his half-god presence erupted forth. He then went after Chen Qiu. 2 blurs collided in the sky, generating a powerful wind that sent dust flying everywhere. The 2 blurs separated soon, and one after another, light beams filled with destructive energy appeared. They forced Ming Wang to retreat a few meters. He descended to the ground to avoid the light beams coming at him with astonishment on his face. "You have already become an initial stage Sage Flux expert," he shouted out. Chen Qiu cracked his neck before saying with a frosty expression, "So you know now. Today, I want to see whether you, a half-god, is more ferocious, or I, a temporary god, is more powerful." Chen Qiu was rejoicing in his heart that while rushing over, he had been able to become an initial stage Sage Flux expert under the guidance of master and mistress. The first cultivation barrier was easily broken. Ming Wang did not reply. A 9th layer Great Flux expert was completely different from initial stage Sage Flux expert. Even if the former used Asura eyes to obtain the strength of a god, he would not be able to control it properly and, at most, would be equally matched with a half-god. As for a Sage Flux expert, they could use Asura eyes completely and fully control their god strength. Boastful words, it is still borrowed strength in the end. I don't believe you can defeat me. You will still lose in the end. Ming Wang coldly snorted and turned into a blur that charged toward him. Chen Qiu also turned into a blur in the spacious street and fled. From time to time, he would send out 2 rays of light beams through his eyes towards Ming Wang. When they touched the ground, they created 2 thumb-sized holes. Ming Wang stopped in the air and looked at Chen Qiu, who had turned into a blur. Furious, he pressed his hands to his chest and formed a strange sign. Suddenly, another him with eyes closed appeared behind his main body. It was also emitting a half-god's presence. When Chen Qiu saw that Ming Wang was using the clan's secret method, his expression tightened. The people with the purest bloodline in Moro clan would grow 3 heads, which was the perfect form of the Moro clansman. Those with impure bloodlines like Ming Wang and Chen Qiu only had 2 faces, one at the front and one at the back. The forbidden technique passed down in the Moro clan allowed them to separate their body into 2. Both would retain the same strength, and they would share their thoughts, which could be described as gaining a helper that matched one's own power. A direct descendant could separate to form 3 bodies while the branch descendants could only form 2. Ming Wang had been forced to spend a lot of time dealing with an ant which had raised its strength to God realm by drawing strength from Asura eyes, so he was naturally furious. Without preamble then, he used the forbidden technique to form another him to resolve the battle in the shortest time possible. Chen Qiu could face off against one Ming Wang with the help of Asura eyes, but he could only run from 2 half-god powerhouses. The next instant, Two Mingwangs opened their eyes and looked at the place where Chen Qiu had stood and saw that it was empty. After searching all over, they discovered that he was rushing to the place with the highest prestige in the City Lord's Mansion. Chapter 820, City Lord's Mansion. Damn it! The two Mingwangs had identical expressions. They slightly frowned and shouted coldly. If they really let Chen Qiu enter the City Lord's Mansion, then not only a half-god like him would not dare to attack, but even if the patriarchs of the four clans wanted to take action, they would have to respectfully request the City Lord for it. No one would dare to use violence in City Lord's Mansion. Who was Ashbai? He is ancient god Asura's son upon whom ancient god Asura doted and who possessed tyrannical strength. He was also half a step into the ancient god realm. Even if the patriarchs of the four clans were formidable, they were only at mid-stage god level at most. Only the founding ancestors of the four clans could match the City Lord. There was a saying in Asura city that patriarchs were like flowing water while the City Lord was as strong as iron. That saying was very true. Even since Asura chose to establish his territory and founded the Asura city, he immediately brought Ashbai and the four founders. Afterwards, the four great clans changed patriarchs countless times, but the City Lord was still Ashbai. Not to mention that presently ancient god Asura was staying in the City Lord's mansion. Anyone who dared to be rampant in front of the tiger did not want to live anymore. If Mingwang wanted to finish Jiao Xiu's mission, he had to capture Chen Qiu before he was within 100-meter distance of the City Lord's mansion. Otherwise, if he crossed the 100-meter distance and entered the territory administered by the City Lord, Wang Ming would not even dare to breathe loudly. He raised his head and saw that Chen Qiu's speed declined gradually, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Seems like the power you borrowed has been used up. Chen Qiu's complexion grew pale when he saw that he was still 1,000 meters away from the City Lord's mansion. He was still 900 meters away from the 100-meter mark. At ordinary times, such a distance would not be considered as anything. Even if he was a great flux expert, Chen Qiu's speed was still enough to cover that distance in half a minute. Not to mention that at that moment he was already an initial stage sage flux expert, who had learned Master's Insect Step and was completely different from before. Right then, he only needed a little more than 10 seconds to cross the 100-meter mark and enter the City Lord's territory. But behind him was Ming Wang, a half-god expert. He would only need a few seconds to cover the 900 meters and take down Chen Qiu in a single breath's time. Two figures appeared next to Chen Qiu and arrogantly said, "Why are you standing here? Continue running." Chen Qiu's eyes returned to normal, and Asura eyes transformed into a beam of light before falling back into his hands. With a tight grip on them, he took a deep breath, and his legs turned into a blur. His speed then grew faster with each step. Ming Wang followed closely behind him. White light flickered in his hand, and he threw it at Chen Qiu. Immediately after, his speed surpassed Chen Qiu's and a bayonet imbued with divine power appeared in his hand. Chen Qiu took a deep breath. His eyes narrowed, and he once again fused Asura eyes with his own, boosting his strength to Great Circle Sage Flux Expert and turned around to dodge the attack. Filled with an either you live or I live madness, he rushed toward Ming Wang. Seeing Chen Qiu's resolve, Ming Wang called him names inwardly. Even if Chen Qiu was borrowing strength from Asura eyes, he still possessed the strength equivalent to a true half-god. If he staked his life to fight against Ming Wang might not be able to endure his attacks. Chen Qiu was only a branch family descendant, so his strength was only at the initial stage of Sage Flux Expert realm. Even if he died, no one would care. But Ming Wang was a half-god expert, the right arm of the Patriarch. If he sustained heavy injuries and wasn't able to complete his mission, he would be finished. Simply a madman, Ming Wang loudly cursed while brandishing his spear. He attacked with it to break Chen Qiu's focus while his right hand turned into a punch and flew toward Chen Qiu's shoulder. The power of a half-god passed through Chen Qiu's shoulder and entered his body, wantonly rampaging in his meridians and even destroying his future. It was enough to send him to the ground coughing mouthfuls of blood. Ming Xiu saw that Chen Qiu was heavily injured, and he slowly walked toward him with a smile. Even if you have Asura eyes, so what? In the end, I still caught you. This outcome was foreordained, so what was the use of your desperate struggle? Chen Qiu coughed a few times before retorting, first take a look at where I am before saying such words. He was covered in blood, but there was a smile on his face, and his voice held no anger. Ming Wang instantly noticed that Chen Qiu was lying past the 100-meter mark, right in the territory of the city lord. As luck would have it, his whole body was at the edge of the territory. The attack from just a moment ago had allowed Chen Qiu to cover a distance of several tens of meters and enter the city lord's domain. During the short fight, he had never stopped thinking about how he could escape. Upon realizing that, Ming Wang finally understood that Chen Qiu was a very shrewd person. It explained how the young master could have been killed by him. I want to see whether you can hide within the city lord's territory for a lifetime without coming out. Ming Wang coldly snorted before stepped into the 100-meter boundary to keep watch on Chen Qiu. Ha 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 ha. Chen Qiu crawled up from the ground while laughing maniacally. He then staggered toward the city lord's mansion while dragging his immobile arm. Escaping Ming Wang's attack just then had only been the first step. Whether he could remain alive and complete Master's mission would depend on what happened at the city lord's mansion. As long as he succeeded, his future would be smooth. Chen Qiu walked toward the city lord's mansion step by step with Ming Wang following behind him at a distance of less than a step between them. When both of them arrived at the gate of the city lord's mansion, the other young masters were already waiting for them at the door while reclining on wooden chairs. Maids were preparing tea for them on the side, which created a very pleasant scenery. I really hadn't expected that you would be able to reach the city lord's mansion. Seems like the person dispatched by Patriarch Xiaoxiu isn't very formidable. Domingo looked at Chen Qiu who was covered in blood. His cold taunt also incidentally caused Ming Wang's face to darken. Domingo, I am afraid that you are mistaken. Why are you acting like a blind person even when you have eyes? This is a half-god expert, the right arm of Patriarch Xiaoxiu and a branch family descendant of Moro clan, Jasmine said while curling her lips hidden behind the veil. Both of them were taunting Ming Wang because when Xiaoxiu had dispatched him with the Patriarch token, his attitude had been extremely rampant. Ming Wang coldly snorted but did not say anything. Chen Qiu walked in front of the closed large door of the city lord's mansion and knelt down on the ground. Moro clan's branch family descendant Chen Qiu requests an audience with the city lord, he said with determination. There was no response from the city lord's mansion, however. The large door did not budge in the slightest. After a while, the young masters reclining on their chairs began to sneer and taunt him. You are only a branch family descendant, so how could you possibly meet with the city lord? I fear that you lost your mind and went crazy. A person can only stay for half an hour every day outside the city lord's mansion. After that time passes, the guards of the city lord's mansion will escort them away. Even if you kept shouting for half an hour, the city lord wouldn't see you. Even we young masters can only see the city lord at prearranged times. A branch family descendant like you would never get the opportunity to be summoned by him. Give up. It would be better if you did something good in this half an hour, because once you leave, you are dead meat. The crime of conspiring to kill the clan's young master is enormous. Don't struggle, little brother, ha 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 ha.